When the airliner came to rest in 20 feet of bright blue water, half a mile from an unfamiliar shore, it looked less like a crash and more like a miracle that had simply parked in the wrong place. The great long-haul jet sat upright on the sandy bottom, wings level, fuselage intact, emergency slides hanging from the doors, like yellow floating toys on a machine far too large for such humiliation. The water was so shallow the airplane barely needed them. Around it swarmed fishing boats, cabin cruisers, harbor launches, ferries, and anything else with room for frightened passengers. By the time the last survivor reached the beach, the shoreline was crowded with locals, police, medics, hotel staff, municipal workers, and curious onlookers, all trying to help a plane load of people who had not expected to arrive in Tasmania. No one had died. No one, incredibly, had even been badly hurt. The town was overwhelmed. The hotels were too small, the airline was scrambling, the local government was improvising, and because the airplane was American operated, an accident investigator was on scene before a full day had passed, moving quickly to interview the crew while memory was still fresh and fear had not yet had time to rewrite the night. He began with the relief first officer. His name was Samir Rahman, 27 years old, talented, tired, and young enough that the glamour of the profession had not yet entirely worn off. He sat with a paper cup trembling in both hands and tried to explain how an ordinary long-haul cruise had become a nightmare. It had happened deep into the overnight oceanic crossing. The captain and first officer were off the flight deck on controlled rest. Samir was at the controls with the relief captain when, without warning, the cockpit erupted. The autopilot disconnected with a violent clacker. Master caution lights came alive. The primary flight displays filled with flags and conflicting data. The attitude indicator wavered. The compass heading drifted. Altitude no longer matched from one side to the other. The flight management computer still held a route, but the airplane no longer seemed to know where it was. Outside, there was nothing. No stars, no moon, no horizon, no visible weather, no ground lights, only the black void of night over open ocean. Samir said he looked from instrument to instrument and found no two telling the same story. No reliable altimeter, no trustworthy heading, no stable attitude reference, no natural horizon, no visual cues of any kind. The relief captain told him to stop chasing the bad indications. Go to pitch and power, trust the standby instruments, and hold known thrust, known trim, and known attitude until they could sort out what had failed. But by then, Samir was already losing the battle inside his own head. His inner ear began telling him lies, that the aircraft was rolling, that it was climbing, that it was falling. He said the sensation was like the cockpit had come loose from the world and been dropped into some giant black machine with no floor and no ceiling. He made a control input, then another, then a larger one. The relief captain shouted, "My aircraft!" and grabbed for the controls, but Samir was already in panic. He pulled against him. The jet rolled, pitched up, lost energy, and entered a violent upset. The stick shaker exploded in his hands. The control column rattled like a jackhammer. Stall, stall, bank angle, bank angle. The relief captain was yelling for him to let go. Samir was yelling that the airplane was upside down. The standby attitude indicator was still trying to tell the truth, but Samir no longer believed it. The nose dropped. Overspeed. In a panic, he dropped the gear. The descent rate climbed. The nose pitched up. The aircraft was a flat spin, but to a terrified young pilot in a black sky, it felt like wings had broken loose and he had begun to corkscrew into the sea. Then the ground proximity warnings joined in. Terrain, terrain, pull up, pull up. Now the captain and first officer burst into the cockpit, slamming the door behind them, dragged awake by the alarms and the unmistakable sound of an airliner no longer being flown, but fought. Samir remembered hands grabbing his arms, someone wrenching at the controls, someone shouting directly into his face. He remembered vomiting. He remembered the captain's voice, low and hard, the voice of a man trying to save an airplane by first subduing one of his own pilots. At last, the first officer got the wings level. For a moment it seemed there was a horizon, but it was just their own landing lights blazing in the fog. The captain called pitch in degrees. Thrust was set by reference. Trim was wound in carefully. Airspeed at last became the one instrument left in the cockpit that still behaved like something from the ordinary world. And slowly, impossibly, the airplane began flying again. Not navigating, not recovering in any elegant sense, but flying, straight enough, stable enough, alive. The captain explained the contingency in the oldest language of emergency flying. Hold known pitch, hold known thrust, protect the airspeed, buy time. Time for dawn, time for the instruments to settle, time for fuel calculations, time for luck. At some point, a flight attendant brought water and food to the cockpit. Samir barely remembered her face. He only remembered being helped out of the flight deck and led away to rest before he completely fell apart in front of the men who had just taken a crippled wide-body back out of the grave. The next witness was the senior flight attendant, Margaret Doyle. Margaret was calm, experienced, and unromantic in the way only a person can be after 30 years of dealing with fear at 37,000 feet. She said the cabin had mostly settled after the upset. The passengers had been told it was turbulence and a systems problem, and that everything was under control. This was not exactly true, but it was close enough to keep panic from spreading. Outside, she said, there was still nothing to see. No stars, no moon, no horizon. Only later did a strange twilight begin to form. But even that was wrong. It did not grow like a normal dawn, it seemed to drift around them, circling faintly in the distance, as though the sunrise itself had lost its way. All four pilots were now in the cockpit, speaking quietly and professionally, trying to solve an impossible problem with checklists, memory items, dead reckoning, and raw discipline. They told Margaret Doyle only what she needed to know. They were lost. They did not yet understand why. And the cabin was not to be told until the cockpit had something better to offer than panic. But Margaret could see the truth. They were not just worried about fuel. They were worried because they did not know where they were, how high they were, or what, exactly, was still real. Then, the younger flight attendant came in. Her name was Lila Hart. Pretty, nervous, eager to help, and not especially burdened by technical knowledge. She reported that a passenger in first class had figured out they were lost. He claimed he could tell because the twilight kept moving in a way no sunrise should. He also said he could help because he was a science teacher and a private pilot, and he had threatened to tell the rest of the passengers what was going on unless someone on the flight deck spoke with him immediately. Under ordinary circumstances, no captain alive would have invited a passenger into the cockpit to help navigate an airliner. These were not ordinary circumstances. So, they brought him in. His name was Peter Haldane, a science teacher, a private pilot, a thin, earnest man with the look of someone who spent a lifetime being correct in rooms full of people who preferred not to hear it. At first, the pilots listened to him only because they had no better options left, but when he suggested using the sunrise, the time of day, the last known position, and their estimated airspeed to construct a rough position, the captain began taking him seriously. Now the cockpit became a different kind of place. Course headings, elapsed time, last valid waypoint in the flight management computer, latitude, longitude, estimated ground speed, solar angle, dead reckoning, drift. Haldane did the calculations, then he did them again, then once more. And finally he looked up and said that the answer was impossible. If the light meant what it seemed to mean, they would have had to be thousands of miles from where the aircraft had any business being, not a little off course, not misaligned, catastrophically wrong. The captain considered this. Then he said that at this point, catastrophically wrong was still better than nothing. Haldane gave him his best guess. He told the captain to turn around. And that might still have been the strangest thing said in the cockpit, had not Lila appeared again a few minutes later, even more frightened than before. The first-class passengers were starting to panic, she said. The captain asked why. Lila said it was because of what they could see outside. The crew said there was nothing outside. And Lila, in the innocent voice of a person with no idea how large her sentence really was, said, pointing at the ceiling, "Not out there, up there." Peter Haldane looked upward through the cockpit glass. And for the first time in his life, science failed him in a way that felt almost personal. Above them was not sky, above them was structure. A vast black plane stretched overhead, so enormous it seemed to flatten thought itself. It was not cloud, not weather, not illusion. It was surface, and along one distant edge of it burned a clean white line, catching the light like a frozen boundary to creation itself. The twilight had not been circling because the earth was round. The twilight had been circling because they were outside it, below the flat earth, beyond the ice wall, out in the void. For several long seconds nobody in the cockpit said a word. No one laughed, no one denied it. The thing had gone too far for denial. Then the captain did what only a career airline captain would do upon discovering forbidden cosmology. He made a plan. Turn toward the light, hold pitch and power, protect the airspeed, conserve fuel, climb as able, do not let anyone in the cockpit become philosophical. They turned toward the distant white wall and flew on through a darkness no map had ever admitted existed, and as they approached, the world began to return in pieces. The standby compass steadied. Then the primary heading stopped wandering. Then one inertial reference came alive long enough for the navigation display to resemble sense again. Crossing back over the ice wall, the altimeters slowly wound themselves into believable numbers, and the natural horizon appeared ahead like an old friend returning from betrayal. The captain immediately ordered the cabin prepared for a possible ditching, because one problem had been solved, and the oldest problem in aviation had not. They were running out of fuel. By the time they reached land, the coast turned out to be Tasmania. No one had expected that. The captain stretched the glide as far as he could, but there is only so much a wide body can do on empty tanks and determination. One engine flamed out, then the other, the ram air turbine dropped, the aircraft became a glider, then a prayer. And then came the water landing that every survivor would later describe as impossible. The next interview was with Lila Hart, and the captain sat beside her while she spoke. Captain Daniel Mercer was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, calm, and tired in the particular way of a man who had already begun sorting reality into two categories, the part that happened and the part that would be allowed into the report. Lila was still shaken. "The captain told us to prepare the cabin for a water landing," she said, "because we were about to run out of food." "Fuel," the captain corrected gently. "Fuel," she said. The investigator smiled and finished the story for her. Then the captain flew on until the engines flamed out, ditched the aircraft in calm water, and here everyone was in Tasmania, safe and sound. Lila nodded weakly. Then she leaned close to the captain and, "Are there vampires here?" The captain put an arm around her. The investigator, after admiring the absurdity of surviving the edge of the world, only to worry about local folklore, Told Captain Mercer it had been an extraordinary ditching, one in a million. Mercer shrugged. Calm sea, good weather, good crew, good luck. Then the investigator stopped smiling. He looked at the captain the way one professional sometimes looks at another when both know the next sentence will not appear in any official document. You went over the ice wall again, didn't you? Captain Mercer gave the tiniest shrug imaginable. Something went wrong, he said. I wasn't in the cockpit. By the time I knew... The investigator raised a hand and stopped him. It's all right. Samir is in some trouble, but he's not the first young pilot to lose control of himself in an upset. This just may not be the right line of work for him. He closed his notebook. We are going to have to do something about the science teacher, though. That was the moment the whole thing stopped being terrifying and became something much stranger. They stood, they stretched. The formal business of impossible things was over. Then the investigator jabbed a finger at the captain and said, with the tired irritation of a man revisiting an old nuisance, I still can't believe you flew over the ice wall again. 3 times, the captain corrected. Lila blinked. What's a ice wall? Captain Mercer patted her gently on the head. Nothing, honey, he said. Airplane stuff. And somewhere, no doubt, an official report began taking shape in the careful language of modern bureaucracy. Instrument anomalies, spatial disorientation, flight deck resource management, fuel exhaustion, successful ditching, survivor response. A sober and respectable account built on the understanding that society functions best when certain facts are filed where the public cannot be trusted with them. Because in most stories the joke is that some poor fool believes the earth is flat. But this is the atomic zone, and here the joke is that it is flat. And all the important people already know.